Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, we're Footballtalk here. Once again, we're breaking down one of my positional rankings for this upcoming NFL draft. I've already done videos on the top running backs, interior defensive linemen, and offensive tackles so far over these last few weeks. And now we're going to move forward a little further to the outside and looking at this loaded group of wide receivers. Right now, I have 6 with a first-round grade on, and all 10 of my guys that I will be presenting here will land in my top 50 ultimately. However, I also think you can find guys, maybe even in the 5th or 6th round, who could probably contribute for you next year to some degree at least. As my top option at the receiver position, I got Jeudy from Alabama, former 5-star recruit, followed the footsteps of Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, and others. Was the Biletnikoff Award winner for the best receiver in the country in 2018, and put up just under 2,500 yards and 24 touchdowns over these last 2 seasons, with over 18 yards per reception. Jeudy's a very smooth and explosive route runner, has incredibly loose hips to basically make any break. His entire body can look one way and then he can just give a little jab step and cut back underneath some defenders. He really works in head fakes and sets up defenders with his body language, uses a variety of releases, and is very advanced with his handworks and subtle push-offs to create separation late in routes. He's kind of an ankle breaker at the receiver position more than anybody in this class. Jeudy has played every receiver spot for the Crimson Tide, was used on a lot of screens and as deception off that. He's very comfortable catching the ball in tight spaces as well, and he was incredible on double moves to catch the defense deep. And don't think of him as just an underneath route runner. He can go over the top as well. Then he's pretty creative in the open field with some ridiculous jukes, backwards jump cuts, dead legs, and all that kind of stuff. But he also showed a lot of toughness on several instances last season when he would just run into guys to pick up crucial yardage. The negatives here, or what I think stands out, he was not even the leading receiver on Bama last year. That was Devontae Smith, who will probably be a first-round pick next year. He doesn't have a lot of play strength and has a bit of a slender frame, which limits his ability as a blocker. He can shield well, but he's not really going to drive people off their spot. And something that bothers me a little bit is that he lets the ball get into his frames too much, and he turns his body upfield as soon as he got his hands on the catch and drops a couple of those that way. With that being said, Jeudy's the best overall route runner in this draft. He has all the tools to be a number 1 receiver and move all across the formation. And while the comparison is a little steep, he reminds me with the way he sets up his routes and makes all his cuts. He kind of reminds me of Odell Beckham Jr. coming out of college, even though he doesn't quite have those spectacular grabs as we've seen from OBJ. Right behind him, I have Ceedee Lamb from Oklahoma, former 4-star recruit who made an immediate impact for the Sooners, over 800 yards and 7 touchdowns as a freshman, which earned him freshman All-American honors. He crossed the 1,000-yard mark and double-digit touchdowns in year 2, and he really exploded last season with 62 catches for over 1,300 yards and 14 TDs, giving him a stupid yards per catch average of 21.4 yards. Lamb has good size at 6'2", around 200 pounds, uses different gears and can get very physical on his routes. He really understood how to adjust routes in the Lincoln Riley air raid system. You see him swat away hands and push off a little to create separation. And he tracks and adjusts midair incredibly well, even with defenders all around him. You see him make some grabs when there's like 3 defenders right around him, and he just goes up in the air and plucks it out of there. I don't think there's anybody who makes more happen after the catch than this guy. Changes up his steps, gives little body fakes, but it can also be very physical and run through guys. I think he really reads leverage as well, understands angles, and just sees the field extremely well. Overall, that led to 26 missed tackles last season. And over these last 2 years, he's had a passer rating of over 145 each. He also had 7 games with over 100 yards last season and came up big in crucial games such as the Big 12 championship game versus Baylor, where he caught like 8 out of his 9 targets for over 170 yards. And then the LSU game in the Peach Bowl, the semifinal, when everybody seemed to shrink on that Oklahoma offense, especially Jalen Hurts having his struggles, but Lamb somehow made big plays against those two really good corners the Tigers have. I also think he does a good job breaking down in space and making defenders work as a blocker, really IDing the biggest threat, even if he's engaged with somebody else already. And Oklahoma also used him on some crackbacks. The things I don't like about Lamb, he cannot quite drop his hips for those dramatic cuts like a Jeudy. That also makes him struggle on some pivot and angle routes. And while I love his yards after catch ability, he could be a little more efficient with getting downfield, reading that first block instead of having his eyes on the second or third level. So he can get a little too fancy with that at times. And he also faced basically no press in the Big 12. I think it was a really tight race for the number one spot here between Lamb and Jeudy. Lamb just is a little bit of a different flavor. Made some real highlight reel catches in this special after the catch. Not quite the route runner Jeudy is. And at number 3 is my final member of the top tier in Henry Ruggs, once again from Alabama. Former 5-star recruit who scored 20 touchdowns on just over 100 touches as a high school senior. All his last 2 seasons, he's only put up about 1,500 yards because of all the talent on the Alabama roster, but he also averaged 17.5 yards per catch and scored 19 touchdowns over that stretch. If you want to know what kind of blazing speed Ruggs has, you just have to look at the disappointment on his face when he realized that he only ran a 4.27 at the combine. I think he has blinding speed, can get from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye, and nobody struck more fear into college defenses than this guy with his ability to go over the top. You see a lot of teams put a safety help deep on him, but he just ran right by a lot of corners and safeties as fast as you can basically look. And he also tracks the deep ball extremely well and adjusts to underthrown balls, which happens a lot when he's that fast, and he really gets to the back shoulder with these. However, I don't think he's just a speedster. Can also work the underneath areas, borderline uncoverable on curls and comebacks when he pushes upfield, and then creates separation that way when he comes back to the quarterback. He's a nightmare on deep in cuts of those vertical concepts. That also led to an almost perfect passer rating in the range of 10 to 19 yards. You can get some easy yards for him through bubbles, jet sweeps, and reverses. Two plays that stick out to me. One against New Mexico last season when he scored a 75-yard touchdown on basically just a motion right into the bubble screen. Caught that one, be like 5 or 6 different angles of guys who thought they were in good position to catch him at the sideline. And then another one versus South Carolina where he caught a quick slant and took it 81 yards to the house, where you really saw him run away from guys there as well. I think he can gain distances on multiple pursuit defenders more than anybody in this class. But he also has good contact balance and strength through breakthrough wraps. He's definitely not small, 190 pounds, and plays quite physical. He also only had 1 drop last season, which is very uncommon for those speedsters. And his big playability is best illustrated by the fact that 24 of his 98 career receptions ended in the end zone. He's also an excellent open field blocker. Getting to the negatives, he only made up 11.2% of that Bama offense last season. He's not quite as well-rounded as some of those other guys I'll be talking about. And he's kind of a straight-line route runner. Bama barely ran in on double moves, which is kind of weird for a guy that fast to not do that, considering he runs those slants and curls and whatever. And he's had a bit of problem with those with press against him, not quite being able to build up that speed the way he is when you give him a free release. So with that being said, Ruggs is definitely not as complete as the other two I already talked about, but some teams may value his speed and big playability even more. He could have a Deebo Samuel type impact in his first year as a pro, while reaching the end zone more times even. Alright, kind of moving to the next tier now. At number 4, I have Javiska Shenault from Colorado, just a former 3-star recruit, but he exploded in 2018 when he led the Buffs to a 5-0 start with 867 yards and 5 touchdowns over that stretch before banging up his toe. He was never quite the same in the couple of games he came back, but still was named team MVP and the first team All-Pac selection despite playing in just 9 games. In 2019, he was right around the 1,000-yard mark and scored 11 touchdowns, which led to a second-team All-Conference selection. Shenault is 6'2", 225 pounds, with more of the build of a linebacker, but with supreme athleticism. He's kind of reminds me of Julio Jones with that body type and kind of the style he plays as well. He did everything for the Buffs, lining up wide in the slot, stacks, running jet sweeps, and even banged his head into the end zone as a wildcat quarterback. Was used on short yardage situations that way. Shenault can run routes better than a lot of sub-6 foot guys can. He took a bunch of handoffs and quick passes, but he can also go over the top, and he made some tough catches with defenders draped all over him, where he shields the ball very well on routes, especially back working to the quarterback. A play that sticks out to me was 2018 versus UCLA, when 2 defenders basically hit him at the same time, one high, one low, almost helicoptering him, but he had held on to the catch really well. What stands out about Shenault once he has the ball in his hands is how quickly he brings it into his body. He's as physical a receiver after the catch as I've seen in a while. Really blasts through some waiting defenders, and he's not afraid to run right into a crowd either. While also protecting the ball with his off arm wrapped around it very well. But at the same time, his burst and explosiveness can also make him take simple slant routes to the house. Did so against USC last season on almost an 80-yard touchdown. And I think he shows very good situational awareness, whether it's down and distance or end of half situations, where he makes the right call a lot of times. The biggest concern with Shenault, obviously, are his injuries. Had surgeries on his toe last season and labrum before the 2019 campaign. He's not a schooler route runner or with his releases as some of the other guys here. And I think he should be much more of a physical blocker, considering his physical traits. Even obviously he was kind of exhausted a lot of times by having to do all that stuff for Colorado and moving across the formations. But I also think he should be more of a beast boxing out downfield. Only made 6 contested catches in 2019, which is kind of weird for a guy with his physical ability. I think Shenault definitely needs some refinements being made to his game, but he's just a very versatile and dynamic playmaker. And it will be up to his medical report what teams think of that way. I could see him sliding a bit in the draft with no pro days or anything like that, and the ability to check out how he's doing physically. But if he's right, he could be a special player at the next level. And closing out my top 5 is Justin Jefferson from LSU. From a 5-star recruit as a receiver and kick returner from the New Orleans area. He didn't make a single catch as a freshman, but then led the Tigers in receptions and receiving yards in year 2. And those numbers skyrocketed last season to 111 catches for 1,540 yards and 24 touchdowns, which sets an all-time school record with his amount of catches. He did so for the eventual national champs and was a second-team All-SEC selection. Jefferson presents a nice frame at 6'1", right around 200 pounds, has a unique style of route running, almost like Keenan Allen in the way he can hop step, slow play versus off coverage, and just keeps defenders off balance that way. He really excels at reading leverages and adjusting on the fly, and he makes some beautiful snags outside his frame with 33-inch arms, which are pretty good for that size. Jefferson is very strong after the catch to break through reps and spin out of tackles, and this start-stop ability makes defenders slip a lot of times, which led to 23 forced missed tackles last season. He's also very tough going over the middle on slant routes and was relied on heavily on third downs to convert. While he did create a lot of separation, Jefferson also had the highest contested catch percentage among all draft-eligible receivers at 92.3%. He's also technically sound and a great effort blocker, was very dependable for the Tigers, and that 4.43 at the combine really helped him more than anybody among the receiver group. With that being said, the things that I don't really like His production came almost exclusively out of the slot, only made 2 catches, line up out wide. And while at time speed obviously looks good, I don't think he does really threaten the defense vertically, and it didn't look like it on tape. He also has a little kickback getting out of his stance, and he needs to find a better balance between being deceptive and losing time getting into his routes. Also dropped 7 passes last season. So to wrap it up with him, he's not as dynamic maybe as Jamar Chase, who's the sophomore sensation at LSU and will probably be a top 10 pick next year. But Jefferson's already at the verse with setting up defenders, and he will keep the chains moving for you as a slot receiver primarily. And number 6, I have Denzel Mims from Baylor. He came in with very high expectations after being one of the best high school athletes in Texas. Played football, basketball, also performed the 200-meter sprint. As a true freshman, he was buried in depth chart, but he exploded in year 2 with over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. Those numbers dropped a little the following season when Baylor's offense really struggled, but he once again cracked the 1,000-yard mark and scored 12 touchdowns last season, which made him a first-team All-Big 12 selection. I think few players have helped themselves more in this pre-draft process than Mims. Put up some highlight tapes at the Senior Bowl, just destroying guys on jump balls or pushing off from curls and stuff like that. And then at the Combine, he just proved that he's an athlete. He's just a freak. Ran a 4.38 in the 40, had the best free count among everybody there. And he jumped out of the gym with 2 really good numbers in the broad and vertical. Mims looks like he was built in a lab, 6'3", 215 pounds with 34-inch arms, and just had ridiculous testing. But I also like a lot what he does as a technician in a receiving department. Uses several different releases versus often press coverages with different speeds, footworks, and just looks he gives the defenders. He's extremely physical in his routes and uses push-offs to create separation, but also has tremendous quickness and has really improved his ability to drop his hips as a route runner. With Mims, those 50-50 balls routinely become 80-20s, works the sideline beautifully with quick turns to the back shoulder, and he judges the trajectory of the ball very well. A lot of catches on balls that would have landed outside the white lines. At the same time, he also has the speed to just run by guys if they don't respect that ability and just play the back shoulder too much. After the catch, he's strong like an ox, always driving for extra yards, and he really gets after it as a blocker. He's engaged and keeps working his feet, and he's fantastic at transitioning from being a route runner to a blocker, really freeing up room for his teammates. The negatives here for Mims, he only forced 7 missed tackles last season and averaged a measly 2.8 yards after catch. Also dropped 7 passes. And I don't think he sells double moves really well at this point, kind of gliding into them too much. Another thing that is just clear to me, he won't throw around NFL defensive backs quite the way he did in the Big 12 to those guys who look like little kids at times going up against him. While I really liked the limited tape of Mims that I had watched at that point, he really convinced me at the Senior Bowl with those more diverse routes after being kind of limited at Baylor. I think people kind of overthink him at this point, similar to a DK Metcalf last season, where you just have a physical freak, and people just want to nitpick a couple of things, but I think Mims will be a stud, and I would love to pick him up at the end of the first round. Those next 3 guys I want to be talking about are very close to each other, starting with Brandon Aiyuk at number 7, one of the top JUCO transfers 2 years ago. Put up just under 500 yards in his first year, and then took a big step forward last season with 65 receptions for right around 1,200 yards, which made him a first-team All-Pac-12 selection. Also really contributed in the return game, averaging 6.9 yards per punt and 31.9 yards per kick return. Aiyuk has the body of a Greek god with 80-inch wingspan, which is bigger actually than the 6'6" Colin Johnson from Texas. I think Aiyuk is much better suited to play on the outsides than N'Keal Harry coming out of Arizona State last season. Aiyuk is very sudden with his bursts and has that extra gear to catch up to the deep ball. He made 8 catches on balls that traveled 20 plus yards through the air. Shows great flexibility and twitch in his lower body, which really showed off on post corners and flat wheels, where he created a lot of separation. Ayuk makes a lot of full extension catches, and he does not panic when the ball is in the air forever, putting his body in the right position. One play that I can think of right now is that underthrown go ball he had in the Michigan State game, which kind of set them up for the game-winning score. But if the quarterback had just let it go normally, Ayuk would have jogged into the end zone. Instead, he had to come back, kind of catch it, and still make a nice run of it and set them up for the game winner. It could have easily been a touchdown as well. Ayuk is extremely competitive after the catch with kind of that returner mentality. Shows a lot of contact balance and power, but also shake and ability to spin away from tackles. That led to 10.9 yards after the catch last season, which is a really, really good number. However, the negatives here, Ayuk dropped 6 passes last season, and I really think he needs to do a better job using those gifts on hindpoint catches, considering the crazy wingspan he has. 3 of 14 contested catches over the last 2 seasons is just not a very good number. And he definitely needs to improve his hand technique versus press, which is severely underdeveloped at this point, which will be a big thing transition to the next level. With that being said, Ayuk is a big play threat who just refuses to go down with the ball in his hands. He's definitely far from being a perfect route runner at this point, but teams should manufacture touches to him early in his career as he develops as an outside receiver, playing more in the slot and taking those quick touches and making things happen with them. At number 8, I have Jalen Reagor from TCU, son of former Texas Tech standout and 8-year NFL defensive lineman Monte Reagor. Jalen himself was a 4-star recruit who quickly announced himself to college football, earning Big 12 Co-Offensive Freshman of the Year, as led the Horned Frogs in all the major receiving categories. He was the team MVP in 2018 and has put up right around 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 18 touchdowns over these last 2 years. At 5'11", 195 pounds, Reagor has a really dense running back-like frame. His body type kind of reminds me of Deebo Samuel of the 49ers. TCU coaches use this explosive burst a lot on screens, jet sweeps, reverses, all that kind of stuff. And in 2018, he actually made up 30% of the Horned Frog passing offense, which was more than 600 yards, more than the next closest receiver. Last season, he had not much help around him. Coaches moved him more into the slot, where it was easier for defense actually to give him extra attention as well, and the quarterback play just was kind of erratic. However, Reagor has the speed to run right by corners, judges the ball extremely well in the air, and really plays above his size on those 50-50 balls. Made 8 contested catches last season and the same amount of 20-plus yard catches. I think he has the ability to win on the outside consistently and a frame to go over the middle as well on slants. I'm not worried about him taking those shots on the inside with that thick body type. After the catch, he makes a lot of defenders who actually have good leverage on him looking completely wrong with the way they try to square him up. Has too much of a burst to run right by them, and also the strength to break some tackles. The negatives here, 7 drops last season, 6 fumbles. That's pretty alarming for a receiver who actually didn't touch the ball that much. And I don't think he moves his feet very well or shows a lot of interest as a blocker. At the combine, he also had the 3rd worst free-con drill among all receivers. And his 4.47 at the combine was kind of disappointing. He had a little bit of excess weight, but I expected him to run somewhere in the 4.3s, and I think a lot of other people did as well. There are definitely some things I don't love about Reagor, like his poor blocking or unrefined route running at this point, but he was already very productive at TCU, and I think he can be deployed in different ways at the next level and be a real asset that way. Right behind him at number 9, I have KJ Hamler from Penn State, from a 4-star recruit despite missing his senior year of high school. Also missed his freshman season with a torn ACL, but in his first year on the active roster, he already led Penn State with 754 yards and over 600 return yards, scoring 6 total touchdowns. As just a redshirt sophomore last season, he made 56 grabs for over 900 yards and had 8 trips to the end zone, which earned him second team All Big Ten notice. Hamler was kind of a do-everything guy for the Nittany Lions. I think he can be a unique route runner at the next level with his sudden bursts and being able to cut off just one step on a bunch of routes, even deeper developing routes, not having to throttle down on those. He eats cushions as quickly as you can basically snap your fingers and creates a lot of separation by swiveling his head and exploding the other way when he's working against safeties, either breaking to the post or to the corner, where those guys just can't really catch up with him, and he kind of makes them look like they are stuck in quicksand. Hamler tracks the deep ball incredibly well, almost like a center fielder. Made 11 catches on passes that were thrown 20 yards or more through the air, including 5 touchdowns. He also had a lot of more opportunities to be targeted on the deep level, but a young quarterback in Sean Clifford just didn't pull the trigger a lot of times and moved around, whilst Hamler was actually breaking free downfield. With the ball in his hands, Hamler is kind of the jitterbug, lightning a ball type guy who can be perfectly corralled by some defenders, but somehow finds a way to escape. He just brought juice to Penn State whenever he was needed, either as a receiver or a return man. On the flip side, as much as you like his ability to separate, he just has diminutive size at 5'9", 178 pounds. Gets knocked around quite a bit by the underneath defenders, and while he's scrappy as a blocker, he just lacks that mass to be very effective in that area. The biggest concern, however, is 12 drops last season. Just a dramatic rate, and he has kind of a small catch radius as well at that size. While the drops are certainly a problem here, I think you see Hamler also come down with a bunch of big catches in the middle of a crowd with defenders right around him. He's a dynamic player in space, and the way he erases cushions is just crazy to me. With at that size, I had to drop him down a little bit. I'm not sure if I want to have him going to up the middle and taking those big shots from linebackers. But he's just a very dynamic player, and I really enjoyed watching his tape. Closing out my top 10 is T. Higgins from Clemson, who was a dominant high school player in the state of Tennessee, which made him a top 20 national recruit and finalist for the state's Mr. Basketball. Already was very encouraging as a freshman, averaging with 20 yards per reception. Then he led the team in receiving yards with around 1,012 touchdowns in 2018 for the eventual national champs. And he was even better last year with 1,167 yards, 13 touchdowns, and overall he tied DeAndre Hopkins and Sammy Watkins actually with his 27 career receiving touchdowns for the Tigers. Higgins is prototype size at 6'4", 205 pounds with an 80-inch wingspan. I really like the way he snaps off his inside breaking routes, and he uses a nice diamond release on slant routes. In this class or in any player around the country, he just ran the best post of any college player last season. Tracks the ball very well over either shoulder, and the way he can high point the ball over defensive backs at full extension is very special. I think he can be a true red zone threat at that size and that ability to win at the contested catches at the highest point. Higgins had a passer rating of 133 when targeted last season. And he came up with 15 of 23 targets that went for 20 yards or more through the air. He's also kind of underrated after the catch, forced 12 missed tackles last season. And as a blocker, he uses his big frame very well and keeps those feet moving to shield guys. However, Higgins ran a 4.54 40 at his pro day, which tells you he's not really a true burner, more of that guy who can win the back shoulder and on jump balls. I think he has to get more efficient with his hands and being able to stack defensive backs and vertical routes. Rounds off too many of his breaks and allows defenders to undercut those. And he exclusively lined up on the perimeter and still dropped 6 passes last season. Something that also stood out to me, he only averaged 55 receiving yards in Clemson's 4 college football playoff games over these last 2 years. So he kind of shrunk in those games. At the same time, I think Higgins can be a very productive pro if used the right way, whether that's on slants, post routes, back shoulder fades, all that kind of stuff. Just don't expect him to run by guys or run a very complex route tree. Higgins has a massive catch radius, and to me still a top 50 prospect in this draft class. Alright, a couple other guys I want to mention here. First up, Michael Pittman from USC, 6'4", 220 pounds with an 80-inch wingspan. Has remarkably quick feet for a big receiver and really nice ball tracking skills. He just destroyed Utah in their game last season and made that, I think it was 77-yard touchdown where he mossed one of the defensive backs downfield and then proceeded to walk into the end zone. At the same time, he also lacks some quick twitch and needs to add some press speeders. But he's one of my favorite receivers in this class as a big body gliding pass catcher with a massive catch radius as well. Next up, this Chase Claypool from Notre Dame. Had a freakish combine, 6'4", 238 pounds, ran a 4.42. Only guy to do that and have those kind of leaping events that he did was Megatron back in the day. Another one of those long striders who can really soar through the air for high point catches. Came with several big grabs for the Irish last season. He's also very physical after the catch and can run away from guys. The problem, he only kind of ran curls, hitches, and those drag routes. Not a very precise route runner, and he's not the most natural catcher of the football either. I want to see a little more urgency, getting off press and getting into his routes at times. Question here, is he tight end as a wide receiver? I think he's a big slot. Couldn't get a lot done for you. And the final guy here, Van Jefferson from Florida. He's an exquisite route runner with very loose hips and suddenness. He shows very crafty skills as a receiver, being able to use little push-offs, pinning arms of defensive backs, whatever that may be. Also has 30-inch arms and is definitely not a small guy. He was the best all-around receiver at the Senior Bowl and really made an impression there for me. With that being said, he's not a very strong blocker and not a true burner either. Will turn 24 before his rookie season even starts. But it really shows up that he's a son of a former NFL receiver and is savvy route running. And I like him a lot over that large group of talented yet unrefined receivers. And to show what kind of freakish receiver class this is, I could not even get to guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones from Michigan and Tony Gandy-Golden from Liberty, who's another one of those 6'4", 220 guys who's a bully out there in the FCS. Then Gabriel Davis from UCF who won a lot of vertical routes. And then guys like Quintus Cephas and the guys from South Carolina, Brian Edwards, who might not be as physically talented as some other guys, but very good route runners. Won a lot at their respective schools, and I like really going forward at the next level. So that's my list. Let me know what you think in the comments. Where I'm right, where I'm wrong, who else you like maybe. You can also check out my other videos and articles on my homepage, and you can find my social media channels in the description if you're interested. I will be back next week breaking down the top safeties before I move on to the quarterbacks. Thanks for watching. I would really appreciate it if you left a like or subscribe to this channel. And until then, see you later. Peace.